Being an inexperienced student, I wanted to follow a whole process of learning new things and unlearning the old ones. I started from level 0 when I decided to create a magazine and worked my way up with some of the knowledge I already had and through constant and tireless research. It is always advised to be cautious and prepared before stepping into a big commitment, which for me was this magazine, so I prepared accordingly. I grouped with 3 more people for the tour and we collectively researched on what name we should give to the magazine and further what content should be explored in each of our editions. After this, all our research journeys were independent according to our own product. Research is the basis of any successful product. Only through research is it possible to really first analyze what exists, then delve deep into its details and context. That's exactly what I followed before creating my magazine. In the very initial stages, I started with researching on magazines as a whole. What is the history of magazines? What types of magazines exist? What are the elements of a magazine? Different types of cover pages and feature articles. I studied everything in order to make myself familiar before diving into creating a magazine digitally. Coming towards the decision of the magazine's topic and name, we utilized Google Forms and Instagram polls to survey people and followed a process of first creating a rough document and evolving towards the Google Forms, making sure that there is a learning curve and no mistakes. With the topic and name decided, at this point my skills had evolved in the specific fields of involving people in the initial stages and researching a lot into the facts and figures of magazines. In my case, to be specific. After researching into magazines, I started my research into photography. First and foremost, I took on to some assignments where I challenged myself to capture images from my own phone according to specific rules of composition, angles, and shots, which led me to implement media studies theory content in real life and shaped my photography skills a lot as it helped me differentiate between all the different ways things can be captured. Next, I learned through the internet platform YouTube the basics of a DSLR, what each mode does, how to capture stable images along with some technical details like ISO settings, shutter speed, etc., and implemented them in my final photography, which is evident through my photography how it improved my skill set. Talking about the more complex fields of photography like lighting, I saw tutorials on the setting of lighting for model photography and learned from them the positioning of lights and what types of lighting to use. Further talking about casting, the process of casting my models was an extensive but quick one, as I didn't require specifications on how the female models should look. I just needed 2 female models who were willing and able to pose for my specific photography and were cooperative. I contacted a few people from my social circle and after asking only a few people, my models were finalized. Location was not a huge headache for me as well, as all my photography was dependent on my models and the props. Many of my photography just required a plain background, so location scouting was a relatively quick process where firstly I visited a production house, but it felt incomplete and did not fulfill my requirements of specific rooms and electricity outlets. Then on my second round to find a location, I visited another production studio and confirmed it. As I stated in my answer of the previous question, I somewhat challenged the conventions of photography for this tour. This is exactly how. I personally wanted my photography to have a very specific aesthetic to them, being inspired by the luxurious styles and auras of the South Asian brides and wanted to integrate them with the traditions of dowry. As it was staged photography, I firstly researched into dowry specific photographies available on social media platforms like Instagram and Pinterest and compiled them firstly in a folder. Using these images, I made mood boards and then I researched specific makeup looks, jewelry, poses for my models, writing them down alongside in my notes just so I can keep looking back at them and utilize them on the day of photography accordingly. I then created and brought props including fake money, costumes, jewelry, diya candles, all according to those targets and mood boards I had set earlier. The props which I did not make personally, I bought them from the marketplace that is near to my home. All of these props acted as the representation of dowry and were further integrated in my final photography. Talking about problems and limitations, I did face some limitations on the day of my photography. When I first started taking the pictures, some sort of glitches started arising in my camera's SD card, which caused it to malfunction and stop storing any further images and also removing the previous pictures which I had taken. Luckily, it happened only in the initial stages of the photography, so I wasn't too deep into the process. This caused a disruption of good 1 to 2 hours, which costed me the models and the locations time and money. However, the SD card did start working again once I inserted it into my SD card reader and researched on what to do in that situation. One thing which I should have done was bring an extra SD card along with me. Nevertheless, we had to capture some images again in order to recover the progress we had lost. Further, I also experimented with the night time on the day of photography and waited till it got dark to take a few pictures of my model with a motorbike, indicating that it's for her dowry. But the pictures did not turn out good, as I hadn't researched enough on techniques of capturing images of models in the dark, which led me to reject those images. But luckily, I had captured enough beforehand in different settings. Another technical limitation I faced was load shedding in my local area in the midst of my photography. The power of my location went out a few times, but I coped with it accordingly. Facing these problems increased my critical thinking skills, forcing me to think of ways to cope up with the problems better. For graphic designing, I used Adobe Photoshop to create my magazine digitally. My journey with Photoshop was a detailed one, as firstly we were taught Photoshop in our media studies class, and I also had some experience in it through my other A-level subject, information technology. So before directly designing the stoor on it for my first time, I practiced Photoshop by designing random cover pages, table of contents and feature articles on it, along with help from YouTube tutorials and Google articles. This actively helped me understand the software better and made me have a better grip on the available tools, further preparing me for the designing of my final magazine. For the layout of the stoor, I took some of my inspirations from several magazines I saw in many articles on Google and created my cover page and table of content inspired by them. But for the letter from editor and all of my feature articles, I experimented a lot. I created several kinds of table of contents and feature articles before deciding on my final ones, and I also did freestyle on many elements along the way, like adding headings which continue on 2 pages instead of just one, adding a black and white cutout image of a tensed father, making a whole page just black and white with the flame of the diya just being covered. All of these details in my magazine were my personal creative touches, which I freestyled and came up with in the process of editing. In between, I did get stuck a lot of times on how to achieve specific tasks, where YouTube tutorials came in handy. The whole process of editing was a really long and challenging one, as I rejected many pages and created many cover pages from which I obviously had to just pick one. Also because I spent a lot of time on deciding the fonts as well after experimenting with a ton.